There's an area of downtown I like to call the Lower East Quadrant that's particularly dense with non-revenue streetcar track. This area is bounded by Queen Street, Church Street, Wellington Street, and York Street. And there's non-revenue track on Adelaide Street, Richmond Street, Wellington Street, Church Street, Victoria Street, and York Street. Now, a lot of this non-revenue track was actually abandoned until very recently when the TTC started restoring track on Adelaide Street, Richmond Street, and York Street for Queen streetcars to divert onto because of Ontario Line construction from Bay Street to Victoria Street. So let's go look at the work they're doing as well as the rest of the area. So this is Church Street at Richmond, and Queen streetcars from the east anyway are currently turning around here through the old Wellington York Streets loop that the 503 used to turn on, but they moved that to King and Spadina. So streetcars are currently turning onto Church Street, going down to Wellington Street, and then looping around there via York and King and back to Church. However, I have seen a couple test streetcars turning onto Richmond here and then turning onto Victoria Street, presumably then turning onto Adelaide and back to Church, but they weren't signed for anything, so I think they're test streetcars for a diversion that they're going to do in like 2 days. So let's actually walk along Richmond to Victoria and see what they're doing over there. So currently Richmond, Adelaide, and Wellington are one way, but they used to be two way. So there used to be old abandoned track on all of those streets going two ways. However, only one of the tracks was actually used and the rest wasn't connected to anything, and was also paved over in some sections. So they've removed most of that on the sections that they're restoring, as well as the wrong direction track on Wellington a while ago, actually. That's not that recent. So this is Victoria Richmond. Up there is Ontario Line construction. And Victoria is actually closed to streetcars from Queen to, well, actually more, it's from Richmond to Dundas. And you can see there, I don't actually know if you can see it, but the overhead lines end. And that's because they've had to take down all the overhead lines on Queen Street from Bay to Victoria. And the overhead lines above the intersection counted for ones they had to take down. So there's no loop on Victoria Street between Dundas and Queen, so Victoria is now closed to streetcars until they finish up its construction in about 4.5 years, I think. And actually at Shooter Street, they've paved over the tracks in the intersection, so they're gonna have to fix those once they start being in service again. Now, walking along Richmond, this construction isn't related. This is electrical construction or something, I don't know. But yeah, there used to be a second track like right there, and now there's just one track because they I think they properly took it out, but they might have just paved over it, I'm not sure. So this is Richmond and York, and I'm pretty sure all the track from Victoria Street is unusable because the overhead lines stop there, but that's because they're currently working on or I believe this is construction for the tracks along York, where streetcars are going to go both ways, at least above Richmond. This actually used to be like a whole switch table here, but they've just reduced it to one switch here because Richmond is one way, and that switch table was for when tracks went both ways on Richmond. Anyway, let's walk down to Adelaide Street. So here's where most of the action is happening, because there wasn't a lot of usable streetcar track on Adelaide prior to this, so they're doing the most work here. Richmond, there were usable tracks that already existed on there, so they didn't have to do that much work. But yeah, you can see that they're double tracking York Street here. That's where the tracks end there. Oh, don't focus on that. That's where the tracks end there. And they've just put in the switch table over here. If you go further that way on Adelaide, there still is a bunch of the abandoned track. I'm not going to go over there right now. You can actually look on Google Maps and on Street View, and they've saved a lot of the captures where there was a bunch of abandoned track along here. So this construction is going all the way to Victoria Street because that's how much track they have to restore. So as we approach Bay, the construction is not as far along here. Right now, I think they're just doing like conduit work or something, but they haven't started to lay track yet. And this is the kind of thing I was talking about with abandoned track. So this will actually, this might be new. This concrete looks new, but yeah, that's definitely not usable. So they might either replace these if these are old tracks, or use them when they eventually reach here. But this concrete looks new. I think these are new tracks, or at least revitalized tracks. Coming up to Yonge Street, I'm pretty sure all this track and the track back there was all new, because this definitely was not here when I was last here. But yeah, they're doing conduit work over here, and the TTC website says they'll start installing overhead lines in the spring. And coming up to Victoria Street, this is where the previous section for active tracks ended, between here and Church. Anything that way was not in an operational state. This segment also is where Queen Streetcars will be diverting to in like 2 days for some parades. As I said before, I saw some test streetcars, or at least I think they were test streetcars. They weren't signed as anything, coming down here. So they'll loop that way across Richmond, go down Victoria, and come this way back to Church. Okay, coming up back to Church, this is where the Adelaide tracks end. And right now, where 501 streetcars are going down, we're gonna walk down to Wellington and see all the stuff there. So coming up to King here, this has obviously been revenue track for a while, but this intersection was where Kingston Road streetcars would turn down Church Street to loop via Wellington and the York. They stopped doing that, I think, when they replaced the 502 and 503 with buses a while back. And then they just, once they brought them back as streetcars, 503 streetcars just looped at Spadina and King. But this is now where 501 streetcars are heading down. They're coming from up there to Wellington over there and using the old 503 looping. So I think previous to like 2019, 2020, there used to be another track on here, similar to how there were double tracks on Richmond and Adelaide, where one wasn't used. That got removed a while back. Can't remember exactly when, but there just used to be an abandoned track on the other side of both Church and Wellington. I'll point that out once we get there. But yeah, there were no overhead lines over it. It was just the one line over the active track where the Kingston Road streetcar looped. Here's where the intersection of Church and Wellington is, and also Front. Right now there's just the single track that turns down onto Wellington. Again, there used to be another track on here. There wasn't a switch table here, but there was just this 90-degree turn, but with two tracks, and one of them didn't have overhead lines going over them, and also didn't connect to anything. There weren't any switches at either York Street or at Church Street to it. It just ended. This is also a bit that was previously revitalized before the project on Adelaide. Before, I think they started construction on the Ontario line. And with that, I think this used to be a parking lane, but it's really nice now. You got the Cafe TO stuff, and these are definitely new supports for the overhead wires. So yeah, all of these stops here, right, Yonge, by the way, all of these stops have been brought up to like modern standards, modern for Toronto anyway. But it makes me think that 503 streetcars are going to loop via this route again, because Queen streetcars are going to detour via Adelaide and Richmond, like I said before. So I feel like because they're putting in all of this effort, the 503 is going to come back here. So we've come up to York Street, and this is where the tracks on Wellington turn 90 degrees. And there also used to be the second track that also turned 90 degrees. There wasn't any switch table, but they've since removed the second track all the way along here. And this is going up to King Street, where Queen Street cars turn east to go back to Church Street. So we made it up to King Street, and they've closed the road here, obviously for the double tracking. I don't know if they're double tracking all the way down to Wellington or not, or if they're even double tracking down to King. If they do double track down just to King, then the new tracks will just turn here, and streetcars won't be able to go further south than York. But yeah, let's walk up and look at what they're doing here. And this is a pretty pointless drop-off sign. Even before streetcars were blocked from coming up here, I don't know why this would be used. So based on what I'm seeing here, it doesn't look like they're double tracking all the way down to King just to Adelaide. But I've just noticed that they've laid new concrete all the way over there. I don't know if they're extending the tracks on Adelaide. We'll go have a look. I said I wouldn't look further west on Adelaide, but this piques my interest. This is what I was talking about. I'm on the west side of York Street, and they've put in a switch so that streetcars can continue this way. And this is all new here, so I guess we'll go have a look. So this is University in Adelaide, and it looks like the tracks just keep going. There's no paved over tracks, but there also isn't any overhead lines. This actually goes to the King and Spadina loop. So I don't know if they're going to allow streetcars to go further west, or actually Adelaide's an eastbound street, but I don't know if they're going to allow streetcars to go from the Spadina loop over to York Street. I haven't found any pave over spots yet, but the tracks are not looking good. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a lot of divots in them. However, I did find this pole, which might be for overhead lines. There's more down there, so I think they will be linking York Street with Spadina via Adelaide. But yeah, you can see it here a little better. There's like a bunch of weird stuff. So if they do allow streetcars to go on these again, I think they will have to replace the rails. But I think they've started putting in poles for overhead lines. Here we are further along Adelaide at Peter Street. This looks like new concrete, but the rails look in the same condition, so I'm not sure. But I think they will be putting streetcars here. We made it to the King and Spadina loop. This is where the 503 streetcars turn around. This is obviously still in service, and actually the rails look in about the same condition, just with more recent wear on them because they're being actively used. So maybe the rails on Adelaide are actually in a usable condition. I'm not an expert on what that really looks like, but I'm curious to see if the switch here is... Yeah, the switch looks still usable, so if they wanted to, and also if there were overhead lines and if there wasn't construction at York Street, I think streetcars could use this section of Adelaide, but they can't right now for obvious reasons. So that's my look at the Lower East Quadrant, as I like to call it, as well as my look at Adelaide Street from York to Spadina. I haven't heard anything about the TTC reinstating Adelaide from York to Spadina, although the concrete did look new where I crossed at Peter Street, or at least a little new. I think that might just be the TTC future-proofing for if they ever want to reopen Adelaide along this section, by telling the city to not pave over the streetcar tracks when they do road work along Adelaide. There weren't any paved over sections. It's also a really good thing that the TTC is revitalizing the tracks along Adelaide from Church to York, and because diverting streetcars along that section is a lot better than diverting them on Dundas like they were before, or splitting them up like they are now. So I'm editing the video and I realized I forgot to record a closing. Uh, I guess I just stopped recording after the last shot and went home. But this is a good thing because it gives me a chance to talk more about one of the things that I was talking about in the video, which was the saved captures on Google Street View for the abandoned streetcar track. So I'm going to go through some of those right now, starting with the intersection at York and Richmond. Just go here. So this is a capture from about 2 months ago, and this is what it currently, well, it's not what it currently looks like, but it's almost what it looks like. Of course, there's construction here now, and they're building another track. But this is what it looked like before they started that, with the single track on York and the single track on Richmond. I'm gonna go back to let's go to 2011, and you can see here that there's way more of a switch table. But most of these tracks are abandoned. You can see there's a gap in the rail there. That's one of the tracks, because that's a switch onto the wrong side in Richmond. The current or the operating tracks are this track that turns onto York, and I think York was, yeah, York was. Good way to tell is the overhead lines, and there's none on. Okay, so wait, we go forward here. Okay, yeah. So York and Richmond were both one way at this point. A good way to tell is the overhead lines, although the image quality isn't always conducive to that. But yeah, okay, we've gone back to 2007 now. Let's go get a better quality image. Yeah, so there was an actual switch table at York and Richmond for when streetcars operated bidirectionally on these two streets. So the next thing I'm gonna take a look at is the abandoned track on Adelaide. And I know of a good example of this, and that's at Adelaide and Young. Uh, oh, okay, perfect. So this is a capture from 2021. This is what it looks like. They don't have captures from the present, probably because they're doing construction in Adelaide. But yeah, this is what it looks like. And this is, you can basically see this sort of thing along the whole street. It's bidirectional. There's a lot of paved over track. And there's a lot of track that just cuts off when they repave a crossroad, for example, or when they just need to fill a pothole or something. So yeah, to revitalize all of the track on Adelaide, they have to tear all of this out and replace it with new track and new concrete there. So the third thing I'm gonna take a look at is the loop where the 503 previously looped. So that's Church, Wellington, and York areas. So we're gonna drop down at Church and King first. And this is a capture from 2021. We're on the south side of King. Let's just go onto the north side first. So this is what it currently looks like. There's a one-way track south of King on Church. And two operating tracks north of King on Church, and those, of course, turn on to King. This is what it currently looks like. But if we go back to, let's say 2013, this is when the 503 was looping here. So the 503 came from this direction down and came onto here. And you can see a bit further, there's a second track on Church that just cuts off there from when there used to be bidirectional streetcar traffic on these streets. Of course, there's no overhead line here, and it cuts off, so this isn't operational. But yeah, if we go further south on Church to Wellington, You can see the 90-degree turn here with the two streetcar tracks. Of course, there's only one overhead line. And if we turn on to Wellington, um, you can see if you compare it with earlier on in the video, you can see the change that the street is overcome. So this did used to be a parking lane, so they filled that in, which is really nice. And then they've taken out the second track here and probably done some maintenance on here. I think a while ago there was like a stack of rails on either Wellington or Adelaide, I can't remember, but it was for revitalizing the streetcar tracks on one of those two streets. Of course, you can see here there's been track that's paved over on the unused track. And if we actually, I'm just going to jump ahead all the way to York, which is about here, I think. Yes. So this is the 2021 capture. This is after they've done all the maintenance. And you can see the one track here. But if we go back to 2013, the double track still exists here. And it cuts off like right here. And it's just single track up until King. And actually, I want to see York north of King because I was curious on... Okay, yeah, it was single tracked north of King. There was like the drop off sign there. I honestly don't know what they would use that for. It's very weird. But yeah, and actually, one more thing. I want to see how or when they actually did the construction to revitalize Wellington Street here. So I'm gonna go like here. I think this is Wellington, right? What direction are we in? Okay, this is looking back. Okay, yeah. Here's the stack of rail. So that's used for redoing the rail here. And if we go back to, oh, we're way in the, okay, yeah. So 2021. Oh, yeah, 2021. That was a capture from. Okay, yeah, this is a capture from 2023, from 2 months ago. That existed then. And then the latest capture we have of Wellington is 2021. Yeah, all right. So it didn't exist then, but they were going to build it. And actually, oh, this is the active track on Wellington. So for a portion of like a few years in 2021 and possibly earlier, let's actually go back to, okay, 2020, it was like this. 2019, it was not like this. But I know for a fact that in 2019, the 503 was operating as a bus. And that might have been for construction up there. Yeah, so for a period of like a few years in this area of time, the 503 was a bus because they were doing work on the streetcar tracks on Wellington. And 2021 they were still doing the work, but between the end of 2021 and September 2023 they finished this part. I think they actually took out the parking lane at this point. So yeah, there's a period of about like within that span of time where they fully revitalized Wellington Street along here, took out this track and repaired this track and put up new overhead line. Hope this was insightful. So yeah.